All right, get ready for a deep dive into a pivotal moment in Thai history, the 1973 Uprising.
A real turning point.
You sent over some excerpts from the Wikipedia article on it.
Yeah.
And it's really got it all, let me tell you.
It does.
Student activism, a government teetering on the brink, and a society really ready for change.
Absolutely. And it's one of those events that, continues to fascinate
For sure.
scholars, historians, anybody really who's interested in the power of movements.
Absolutely. And I think this deep dive is going to give everyone listening the tools
Yeah.
to really unpack and understand the significance of it all.
I think so.
So to really kick things off, let's rewind a bit, go back in time a little bit.
Okay.
To the decades before 1973. So we're talking the 50s and the 60s.
Okay.
What was student life like back then? Were they always politically active?
Well, picture this. The 1950s.
Okay.
You've got this rise of what were called leftist ideologies happening globally.
Okay.
Think questioning social hierarchies, advocating for workers' rights,
Right.
even challenging, these traditional power structures.
Interesting.
And these ideas, they resonated with students in Thailand,
Yeah. Makes it
particularly as, more and more people started accessing higher education.
right. So you have more students, more exposure to these new ideas.
Right.
Sounds like kind of the perfect recipe for activism, right?
Yeah, exactly. And here's the thing.
Okay.
Early student activism in Thailand, it looked a bit different than what we might, picture today.
Really? How so?
So instead of directly challenging the government,
Okay.
it was more about displays of loyalty, almost like performing support,
Interesting.
within that existing system.
So when did that shift?
Yeah.
When did students start to become more vocal in their opposition to the government?
Well, there's a pretty clear turning point. The death of Field Marshal Thanom in 1963.
Okay.
So the government, now led by Thanom Kittikachorn,
Right.
it was still authoritarian, for sure.
Right.
But there was this slight loosening of control, I guess you could say. A bit more tolerance for, intellectual debate and, a little bit of dissent.
Interesting.
It's almost like a pressure cooker letting off a little steam.
I like that.
And you see publications like the Social Science Review popping up around this time,
Okay.
encouraging students to think critically about Thai society and politics.
That makes sense.
Yeah?
With a little more freedom of expression, you get the opportunity to kind of,
Challenge the status quo.
exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, the Wikipedia article you shared also mentioned these student discussion groups
Yes.
forming at universities, and it compares them to student unions.
Right.
But it sounds like these groups were doing a lot more than just debating amongst themselves.
Yeah, for sure. These weren't your typical student unions.
Okay.
They were inspired by the U.S. Peace Corps, actually.
Interesting.
And they started organizing these development programs in rural communities.
Wow, so they were taking their ideas and actually going out
Right, exactly.
into the real world and trying to implement them.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. Was that common back then?
It was becoming more common, and for these students, it was a real eye-opener.
Yeah.
I mean, here they were getting this education,
Right.
but then they go out and see firsthand the realities of poverty and inequality
Right.
in their own country.
Talk about a reality check.
Exactly.
That must have been a huge wake-up call for a lot of them.
Oh, absolutely. It was a wake-up call. They were getting this education,
Right.
but they were realizing it wasn't really equipping them to address the very real problems that they were seeing.
Right, this dissonance that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Must have been really powerful, this feeling that something needs to change.
Absolutely, and that's what fueled them.
Okay, so this desire for change, for a different Thailand, it ultimately leads to the creation of the National Student Center of Thailand.
Right, the NSCT.
The NSCT. What was their initial goal when they first formed? Or were they immediately a radical group? Were they formed with the intention of leading a revolution?
Not quite. The NSCT, it was founded in 1968,
Okay.
and their idea was to give students a unified voice, right?
Yeah.
And to coordinate actions on a national scale.
Right. Makes sense.
But their early activities, they were more service-oriented.
So community service type things.
Yeah, I think community service projects, welcoming new students, that
Okay.
sort of thing.
Okay, so not exactly a radical protest group right out of the gate.
Not right away.
What shaped that initial approach? Was it the leadership at the time?
It was partly the leadership structure, yeah. The NSCT,
Okay.
it wasn't just students calling all the shots. University presidents, who tended to be more conservative, they had a lot of influence,
Interesting.
made it a bit tricky for more, shall we say, radical voices to kind of take control.
Okay, so how did things evolve from there?
Well, things started to change in 1972 with a new Secretary General, a guy named Thuriyuth Boonmi.
The Thuriyuth Boonmi, he seems like a pretty key figure in all of this.
Oh, absolutely.
What was it about him that allowed him to kind of shift the NSCT towards a more politically active path?
He was a strategist, this Thuriyuth Boonmi.
Okay.
He understood that, like, going head-to-head with the government right away wouldn't get them very far.
Too much too soon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They needed to be smart about it, build up public support, show their strength, but subtly.
So what did that look like in action? How did they do that?
Okay, so in 1972,
Okay.
Thuriyuth leads the NSCT in a boycott of Japanese goods.
Interesting tactic, a boycott. Why Japanese goods specifically?
It was brilliant, actually, on like several levels.
Okay.
First, it tapped into this vein of Thai nationalism that was already there.
Right.
Right? There were these existing economic tensions.
Okay.
And second,
Yeah.
it allowed them to, really flex their organizational muscle, show the government what they were capable of,
Yeah.
but without directly confronting them, without
Right, it was a very subtle sort of dig.
Exactly, a silent protest in a way.
Did it work? Did the government get the message?
Oh, they felt it for sure.
Yeah.
The boycott gained a ton of traction. And the government, they couldn't ignore the NSCT's growing influence.
Things are heating up.
Yeah, and it only escalated from there.
Yeah.
Because later that same year, December 1972,
Okay.
the government issues this decree
Okay.
that essentially would have given them way more control over the judicial system.
So, like, stacking the courts in their favor.
Exactly. Imagine, like, the government handpicking judges who are sympathetic to their cause.
Right. That's not good.
Not good at all. This was a huge deal.
Yeah, talk about a power grab.
Exactly.
So how did the NSCT counter that move?
This time, they were much more direct.
Like-
They organized sit-ins, marches, rallies, and they drew support from, like, way beyond just the student body.
So other groups started to
Oh, yeah.
join their cause.
You had the Lawyers Association of Thailand.
Okay.
Even some media outlets were starting to side with them.
Oh.
It was becoming a much broader movement.
So what happened? Did the government back down?
Eventually, yeah, they kind of had to. The pressure was too much.
Right.
But it was clear that the NSCT, they were a force to be reckoned with.
They were testing the limits, finding their voice,
Absolutely.
and realizing the power that they actually had.
For sure, it was a turning point.
And this all kind of culminates or leads up to, I guess I should say,
It does.
the 1973 Uprising.
Yeah.
Which we are going to, really dig into.
Yes.
But before we do, the Wikipedia article that you sent over mentioned something called the Thung Yai hunting scandal.
Oh, right.
What was that about, and how did it kind of escalate things even further?
Okay, so picture this. April 1973,
Okay.
a military helicopter crashes. But this is not just any helicopter crash on board. You have high-ranking military officials. You have influential businessmen.
Right.
And to make matters even more, scandalous,
Yeah.
a beloved Thai film star.
Wow. Okay. Now that's a recipe for a scandal.
Right.
What happened?
Well, those deaths, and particularly the death of the film star,
Okay.
it couldn't just be swept under the rug.
Yeah.
Rumors of a government cover-up started spreading like wildfire,
Makes sense.
fueling public anger and outrage.
Right.
And the NSCT, they seize this opportunity.
Okay.
They start using satire. They're putting on public performances, even plays,
Yeah.
to really shine a light on this scandal and the government's really clumsy attempts at damage control.
So they were getting pretty savvy using creative, even humorous ways to challenge authority.
Oh, absolutely.
How did the government respond to this new tactic? Did they try to shut down the NSCT completely?
They tried, but, and this is the thing,
Yeah, how-
everything they did just seemed to backfire
Really?
spectacularly.
Give me an example.
So they expel this group of students from Ramkhamhaeng University,
Okay.
their crime,
Yeah.
staging a satirical play about the Thung Yai scandal.
A play. They got expelled for putting on a play.
That's right.
Wow.
And then they make this decision that, looking back, it seems almost unbelievable.
Right?
They close the universities.
Wait, they thought shutting down universities was a good idea.
You'd think they would have learned by now, but no.
It seems like that would just make things worse, right? Like throwing gasoline on a fire.
That's exactly what happened.
Right.
Because instead of silencing the dissent, right,
Yeah.
their actions just ignited even bigger student protests.
So it backfired. Big time.
Big time. What started as a demand for these students to be reinstated quickly morphed into something much, much bigger.
What, like what?
We're talking a call for a new constitution, for real political freedom.
Wow. Okay, so the stakes are getting much higher.
Much higher, and by October of 73, the tension was palpable, you know?
Yeah.
Something had to give.
The stage is set.
Exactly.
All right, so take us through what happens next. We've got arrests, massive protests, a government that seems to be, like, completely losing control.
Losing control, yeah.
What were those final days like leading up to the 14th? What exactly happened on that fateful day that led to the downfall of the Thanom regime?
It was a wild ride those last few days.
I bet.
So October 6th, government, they arrest 11 activists.
11, what for?
Their crime, distributing leaflets.
Leaflets, seriously.
Yeah, advocating for a new constitution, which, you know.
Right, but still, leaflets. That's all it took to get arrested.
That's how high the tension was, you know?
Wow, talk about an overreaction.
Read it.
Did that silence the students, though? Did it scare them into backing down?
Quite the opposite, actually.
Right.
The very next day,
Okay.
thousands of students from Thammasat University, they staged this huge protest demanding the release of those activists. And it quickly turns into this all-night vigil with students from other universities pouring in, showing support. I mean, the crowds.
So it just kept growing.
Oh, yeah. It was incredible. You know, this real sense of solidarity.
It seems like the government just, like, accidentally poured gasoline on the fire with that move.
Yeah, they really did. And, you know, they tried to de-escalate.
Okay.
On October 12th, they announced that they'll release the activists on bail.
Okay, that sounds reasonable enough.
But the students, they refused.
They did. Why?
They wanted unconditional release, no strings attached.
Wow, they were serious. They weren't backing down.
Not a chance. By then, the protests, they were everywhere, nationwide.
Wait, it wasn't just students anymore, right?
No, this was way bigger than just students.
Right, it was like the whole country was watching.
Exactly.
The Wikipedia article mentioned a massive March to Democracy monument. What, like, how many people are we talking?
It was unbelievable. I mean, imagine a sea of humanity, 400,000 people, marching towards Democracy Monument on October 13th.
Wow, 400,000. That's incredible. Did the government give in at that point?
They kind of had to. The pressure was immense. So, yeah, they finally agreed to release the prisoners.
Unconditionally.
Unconditionally, and they promised a new constitution.
Okay, so they met the students' demands.
They did. By the following year, they promised.
Wow, it sounds like a victory. A real moment of triumph for the movement.
And for many, it was. But, and there's always a but in these situations, right?
Right.
A faction of the students, led by Sekson Przyrtkul,
Okay.
they decide to march to the royal palace.
To the palace? Why?
They wanted to seek King Bhumibol's guidance.
That seems like a risky move, given how things have been going. What happened when they reached the palace?
Well, October 14th arrives.
Okay, this is the day.
The students are marching towards the palace.
Right.
And they are met with barricades and a heavy police presence.
So much for a warm welcome.
Yeah, and the atmosphere, it was just electric, you know?
Right, because just the day before.
Right, you had these massive, peaceful protests.
Yeah, and now you have all this tension, this uncertainty. It's like anything could happen.
So how did it escalate so quickly? What was the spark that turned those peaceful demonstrations into, well, what happened next?
It's still debated among historians what the actual trigger was.
Okay.
But a lot of people believe that there were people within the government itself who wanted to crush the movement.
Really?
Who wanted to use this as an excuse to crack down.
So maybe even like instigated the violence?
It's possible. Whatever the cause, though, the result was tragic.
Right.
The police opened fire on these unarmed students.
You're kidding.
Tanks rolled into the streets. It was chaos.
From peaceful marches to tanks in the streets. Wow.
It was a dark day. 77 confirmed dead.
Oh my God.
Over 857 injured.
That's awful. A day that started with such hope, ending in bloodshed.
It really did, but, and I know this might sound strange given what had just happened, but amidst the tragedy, the Thanom regime, it crumbled.
So the students, they achieved their goal, but at a heartbreaking cost. A terrible cost. As news of the massacre spread, King Bhumibol, he intervened.
Okay.
He addresses the nation that evening, announces Thanom's resignation, the end of his military government.
Wow, so it's over. Just like that.
Thanom and his allies, they flee the country.
A bittersweet victory, if ever there was one.
Absolutely. Their courage, their sacrifice, it brought down a regime, but it also left this indelible mark on Thailand's history.
It really does make you think, doesn't it?
Does.
This whole deep dive has really been eye-opening,
Yeah.
to really understand the complexities of this period, but also, like, the bravery of those students, of everyone who dared to demand change.
Absolutely. And that's what stands out to me, I think. The spirit of those students.
What do you mean?
I mean, they dared to challenge the way things were, knowing the risks, knowing what they were up against. And their actions, they continue to inspire, all over the world, people fighting for democracy, for justice.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope can ignite change.
Right. It can, and it does.
And that is a wrap on our deep dive into the 1973 Thai Uprising. We explored the events leading up to that day, the motivations of the student activists, the lasting impact it had on Thailand. It's a story of courage, of sacrifice, and that enduring fight for democracy. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, keep exploring the depths of history with us.